Good morning, Bookwave.
What do you mean? Do you wish me a good morning?
Or mean it's a good morning whether I want it or not?
Or that you feel good this morning, or that it is a morning to be good on.
All of them at once. Welcome back. Welcome back to Bookwave, the book club podcast. Today, we're talking about The Hobbit by J.R.R. Tolkien. And I just gotta say, this is one of the most magical books I have ever read. Like, for this podcast or in general. And I'm eager to hear all of your opinions on it. So what did you guys think? Oh, before that, if you're new around here, you should check us out at our website at bookwave.club. And our podcast is on anchor.fm and everywhere podcasts are found. And on YouTube at the Bookwave channel. So, what did you guys have to think? Or what did you guys have to say?
Synapsion here, and greetings to the Nine Realms. When you said it's the most magical book, is that more so than the Bible?
Honestly, yes. I mean, that might sound really bad, but we've been going through the Bible for quite some time. And honestly, Will himself has talked about sort of a demystification process going on. And with The Hobbit, it's like the complete reverse. It's like, instead of just having this mystical thing where you just can't really explain, it's like now I'm like starting to see the light of these texts that I just haven't read before. Like, I'm a huge fan of the Lord of the Rings movies, but I've never gotten into it before. But like, when getting into the books, it just illuminated everything and made me feel like I was a little kid again, just rediscovering that little part of myself when I was reading this. But the same experience with the Bible, it's like, you know, I knew most of it already, but when I started reading it, it's like, oh, this is easily explained, where Tolkien presents that kind of formula as, no, this is magic. The world is magic. This is just how it is. And it almost offers like another frame where you can look at the world as magical.
Yeah, I think for me reading it, I just immediately pictured reading it to my kids whenever they do
Exactly.
come into this world. And you got to do the voices if that's going to happen. And you read this book and it's so easy to want to do the voices and to want to read it to a child and like at an appropriate age. It's pretty gruesome at times. But like, I think for me, looking at sort of the props of the book, which is something I talked about with the Bible, that chest plate that they made for, I think it was Aaron.
Yeah.
I don't remember now. But like in The Hobbit, you've got this ring of invisibility. And, that's just one trinket in one of 4 trinket slots on your character sheet. But this thing delivers like time in and time out. And the amount of backstory going into it, I think really helps as well. Like, having watched the Lord of the Rings movies and having watched the Hobbit trilogy now and never having touched the Lord of the Rings books because, oh my goodness, it's so intimidating. But Paul VanderKlay says that we should read them, so we're going to. It's just extra, I guess, sentimental, because you have the origin story. You're reading the origin story, but you also have the future and the history with the Silmarillion. Like, it is magical, and it's ancient, and it's new, and it's fascinating, and I just loved it.
I think this is one of the first fantasy novels we've dipped our toes in as a book club.
I think you might be right.
I think you might be right.
And
well,
Will,
The Alchemist, I guess.
Will, you were talking about some of the ancient aspects of this, and I did a little bit of digging through like what the author was thinking when he wrote it, and apparently he was a very big fan of Norse mythology and ancient English literature, and so he used those tales, those lore, from the North, and brought it into this book. And one of the things that makes it sentimental for me is that feeling you get when you start reading a good fantasy novel. You start to notice allegorical aspects of it. I don't think this the whole story's an allegory, but there are definitely allegorical aspects, and it takes you away to a different place in your mind. And I think that's a very important part of reading a book like this, like as an escape from reality, but not in the same way that, you know, a drug would be an escape from reality. This is like a wholesome escape into another world.
It's funny you say that because like I feel elitist when I say this, but I think that you should read books. I think you should stare at dead trees and hallucinate and use your creative faculties to imagine these realms. And like even today I was doing something while listening to a podcast, and it's like I'm not getting anything out of it. And I think it's really easy to listen to audiobooks, and you know it's become this thing where it's like, oh, on the commute, oh, while you're working out, while you've got downtime, while you're cleaning the house. And it's like, no, like even if you're gonna do the audiobook, sit down and listen to it and do nothing else. Consume yourself in it and think and experience and imagine and activate that part of your brain that does creative fantasy, because it's its own experience and there's no competing with it.
I couldn't agree more. Like watching the Hobbit movies and then going back to read this book was like not even slightly related experiences. Like
Apples to oranges.
exactly, it's wild.
It's one of those adaptations that you have to compare side by side, and I've had similar experiences with other books that have also been adapted to films, and it's completely different, even if they follow the same patterns and routines and everything. But from my experience reading The Hobbit, coming back into reading The Hobbit, I remember reading this in high school for my English class, and not really picking up everything because I didn't understand it. But coming back to it, I realized that it's just a classical version of the hero's journey, or, you know, like a beginner's tale of the hero's journey and how it's all layered out. We see Bilbo as this ordinary creature minding his own business, living in peace until he's been given a task to steal a the Arkenstone and giving it back to the dwarves from this dragon. And it parallels with what I've been learning about storytelling, which is in order to become a heroic character, you have to do something risky, and you may end up with a lot of problems with it along the way, but it goes to show that you have something you can do, something that you're capable of doing. And the more you are digesting this experience, the better off you will be. Even so much as not thinking about it so much, not thinking twice, not even second guessing, not even regretting it. We see that as when Bilbo goes along the journey, especially when they're in the woods and all the spiders come out and everything, and he's trying to figure out which way to go, and when they're lost and everything. That was actually my favorite part. It
It's
shows.
funny. Me
it sh-
too.
yeah,
Me
it
too. Agree.
shows. It just
The
shows
naming of Sting.
everything. Yeah.
Well, I think this is one of those books you have to want to read. If you're forced to read it, you're going to skip over the songs and get back to the paragraphs and, you know, start flipping pages. If you really want to get into it, each paragraph, there's a whole world that's being described. And Pat, you mentioned that Bilbo's the hero and this is the hero's journey. And I kind of found it interesting that in order for him to reach that goal, he had to adopt something that wasn't exactly wholesome. He had to become a burglar or a thief in order
But
to
he
do
always
something
he always described himself as an honest burglar. Like when at the end when
Yeah.
he has to decide what he's gonna do with his burgled loot, he's just like, yeah, I'm a burglar and I guess I'm pretty good at it, but I'd always fancied myself an honest burglar if I could be. And that's just like, oh, he never lost himself. He was always true to his being, like right up until the end. Like that's a real hero right there. But
And he was.
he wasn't like the only hero in the book too. Like you could easily find comparisons between Thorin and someone like Odysseus, like the king returning home to get his treasure back and return back to his family or whatever. Like there's a
It's
couple
funny you make
different
that
hero
comparison.
journeys.
Because like I would almost say that there's something other to call that, because Odysseus and Thorin were heroes and then had a quest, whereas the hero's journey sort of is a becoming, right? And with Bilbo, it's kind of like I was listening to John Vervaeke talking about this philosophical proposition of becoming a vampire. It's like you don't know what you'll gain and you don't know what you'll lose, and it's like that's the hero's journey. You're going to become something
Hmm.
different. And Gandalf the whole time is like I'm certain you will not be the same. And one of the things that I liked throughout the book, every 80 pages or so, Bilbo would yearn for his hobbit hole. And he never lost that sense of wanting to get home, but he chose to become something different and embrace the part of himself that would do different. And I think that that's something that's inside all of us, right? We all have a bit of Took and a bit of Baggins in us.
Yeah, especially when you come
100%.
back from the journey, you are not the same. You just remember those moments, they stick with you. But then, of course, you still have to carry out with your days as normal.
Yeah, and I think Bilbo loses that altogether. I think, like he got back, and if you look at the movies, but we'll find out something differently in the books of Lord of the Rings, like we have the long expected party is the way things kick off. And, by the end of the trilogy, Bilbo is sailing west with the elves, and he's come to a place where he's given up this ring and he's done his journey and he's ready to move on and transcend to a higher state. And there's so much we could talk about by the time we're done this trilogy about all of these allegorical, elusive
Yeah.
elements.
That allegorical element is something that we should really talk about because a lot of people try to pin down The Lord of the Rings or The Hobbit as a straight allegory for, say, his war experience or for his, his deep Catholic beliefs or an allegory for the Norse stories. But really, it's like an amalgamation of everything together. And half of it is just because he has a few kids he wanted to entertain. Like the entire story of The Hobbit, this is where it all started. This is the origin of The Lord of the Rings. And he just wrote it for his kids. And there was a wonderful little part in the introduction where he says that, like when he was reading the story to his kids, and one of his kids said, "Hey, what do you mean the door is green? Last week you said it was blue." And he's like, "Oh, damn those kids. I have to go rewrite this." So there's a little homage to that in the like original like final printing of it where it says like the door was green and then like in brackets freshly painted. So it's just like that's the little excuse he had for his kids. And like how much more wholesome can you get? Like, yeah, there's all of these elements of like Leif Erikson or Eric the Red or, Jesus or whatever else. All of his experiences from the war would have definitely like affected his writing process. But at the end of the day, he's just a storyteller being there for his children. And there's a lot of magic to that, I tell you.
And it's interesting too, because like the book's about Bilbo, but you get all of this backstory on the family of Baggins and Tooks and the region. And it's interesting that, half of storytelling is just backstorytelling and laying out the terrain. And as you experience these descriptions, you get acquainted to the character, to his life, to the environment he's in, to the conditions of his raising. And familiarity breeds this beautiful bond between you and the character. And it doesn't matter, it's just a made up character, but you keep listening and you keep drinking it in, and it's like, oh, I'm invested in this person. Like my wife and I, we've been watching Attack on Titan, and it's in the final season.
Same.
And Paradise Island is this island that is, remote to the rest of the world, and then the rest of the world sends a ship and they capture a couple crewmates, and they do an episode talking about all of the developments to their infrastructure and their engineering that came from this outside information. And it's like, I could eat that up for a week. You could give me 25 episodes of them building airships. Like, I know what an airship is. I know that if you got an engineer who knew how to build an airship and you'd never heard of it, that you'd learn how to build it and it would be really cool. But like, it's so good. Like, and all they're doing is telling this side story about how they've developed their infrastructure. But because I'm attached to the characters and their world, I'm happy for them that they're getting progress and learning. And it's,
and
I don't know, there's something there.
There was that one description where they encountered the wood elves, and then it just goes into this huge description where it's just like, these aren't like the high elves we saw in the previous chapters. You see, there's sea elves and there's night elves or whatever else. There's like all these different classes. They all used to be the same thing, but as they migrated and adapted, they all became different things. I'm like, what is Tolkien trying to tell us there? Like,
I'll take 50 short stories, please.
Yeah.
Like, now that I'm familiar with the world, I'll take a backstory on Gandalf and the White Wizards and the Blue Wizards and the Gray Wizards. I'll take a backstory on Mordor. I'll take a backstory on Legolas. Like, I'll read a trilogy about the elves and what the heck they're doing in the West. And it's like, it's just made up, but I'm curious about it, and I want you to flesh out this world for me.
Yeah, we're hungry for the lore of this universe that has never been thought up. Like, it doesn't exist even in the mind of Tolkien. He never wrote that. When he like talks about like the Blue Wizards in a few of his letters, he's just like, yeah, I really wonder what happened to those guys. I never really
just as a joke.
Meanwhile, there's like 10 million fans that are dressing up as wizards year round, and they're like creating fan fictions on AO3, and it's like, oh my goodness.
Yeah.
So one thing that I've noticed about this book and how it fully develops today, like how it stands out today. Scott, you mentioned how this book made you feel like a child again, and it, in a sense, I felt like a child again reading it too. And I've noticed that in some forms of entertainment today, we see a lot of dark stories and nothing more. Like, we can take Game of Thrones or whatever, and those are fun and entertaining, but when was the last time you've watched something or read something that had, scenes of lightheartedness or an ending that was lighthearted, like The Hobbit?
It's hard to do. It's hard to achieve. I actually am addicted to that time I got reincarnated as a slime. It's a lovely anime out of Japan where a middle 30s D&D player, think of his history as you will, gets reincarnated as a slime with the ability to not experience pain or fire and to be able to learn everything. He just becomes this like omnipotent slime that just can constantly win every encounter. And it's like 30 episodes of like, oh, a demon lord showed up to kill the slime and he gave it honey and now they're best friends. And it's so good. It's like, oh no, there's 10 million giant boar orcs outside the kingdom and he killed their leader and they all became friends.
Yeah. There's plenty of anime that you could find out there, like that you could name any number of them. Like, there's lots, but not very many of them reach the status in our culture like Game of Thrones does. And that kind of ended in a pretty nihilistic way. Spoiler alert, if you don't already know.
Bit of fire.
Yeah, literally. But like, I don't know, I think there's still an attempt to make wholesome content. Like, not everything ends in just a pit of fire. But it definitely takes some looking for.
Well, and it's like combat is so easily consumed. Like, I saw this, like, there's so many things where you watch the trailer and it's like there's 4 lines and it's all just the sound of swords hitting each other. It's like there's no story here, and yet people lap it up, and it's like Narnia was great. Harry Potter was kind of freaky, wasn't it?
Yeah. I like Harry Potter. Nothing wrong with that.
No, but it got pretty dark and weird near the end, didn't it?
Yeah, I
Like
think you really
after
have to.
Sirius got pushed through the curtain, it was like it was all dark from there.
That that messed me up, man. That messed me up.
He wasn't on the other side. Why wasn't he on the other side?
Oh, sheesh.
Well, there are dark elements to this story of the Hobbit, and I mean, it starts with Bilbo. He's a hobbit living in a hole, and they portray him as a 50-year-old something who led a relatively concealed life. His parents, the Tooks, were more adventurous, but that was something not looked up upon. Being adventurous was being strange. So, like, for most of his life, he just, from my understanding, stayed at his home, read his mail, never left the Shire. And I kind of got the feeling that the Shire was this land of milk and honey. Like, that's what they said his father ate, cream and honey. And here he is, a 50-year-old person. Every child knows they're going to grow up one day, and they don't know what adulthood holds for them. But in this particular character, he is setting off his normal routines. When he first meets Gandalf, he's just kind of like, good day, and we don't want any adventures here. Go on. But he ends up adopting this this quest, essentially, possibly because he's unhappy with the way life is going. Maybe he's bored. I don't know. What do you guys think about that? Why he decided to go versus not go?
Well, I mean, his neighbors are annoying. They constantly try to invite him out and everything. But
Well,
he
they
just
did sell all of his things in an auction when he didn't come back
They-
for a year.
Yeah, they sold us some of his stuff. Yeah.
But it's kind of like what Jordan Peterson says: if you have everything, if you're living in nirvana, eventually you're going to want something that's interesting happen. And if nothing interesting happens on its own, you're going to make it happen, maybe by breaking something, breaking the rules. So he becomes a burglar and sets off on this quest.
Yeah, I think if you're perfectly content and happy, and you've got all of your needs satisfied, and you're comfortable, and you could do this for a very long time. Like the hobbits have a very long life, and a lot of the creatures in this world have a very long life, and I think that concept is kind of like another John Vervaeke episode where he was talking about a concept of heaven, where it was like, okay, so you're never going to die, you can do anything, you can master everything. And so first you master your golf swing, you get your game down to like an 18 hole game, and then it's like, okay, but how do you fulfill yourself? And
Yeah.
I haven't heard many answers other than service to others.
It's also kind of a lot like what Vervaeke was, or not Vervaeke, what Paul VanderKlay was talking about in our conversation about like the age of decay. All of these older races, they live for hundreds of years, and then humans are created afterwards, and we're just 100 years if we're lucky. And
A
like
blink.
yeah, like the whole age of decay thing makes me think of like when the elves were all one race and then they spread across the world and became something different. Like, is that part of his commentary right there? Was he trying to say something like this is a representation of the age of decay in my universe, and like we're just going downhill from now, and all of a sudden there's necromancers making rings of powers, and what are we gonna do about all of that?
And alongside with that, when Bilbo decides to go out, there's a part of him that thinks, well, the Tooks have gone on adventures and everything. Everyone else has gone on adventures before, so why not me? Why can't I not pass this opportunity or something like that? So he goes off.
Yeah. Like, we all have pretty good lives. Would you go for the adventure? Would you help the dwarves?
Oh God, yeah. Oh, I would throw myself at a dragon.
If Gandalf showed up, I would go.
Yeah, I'd follow that
I
big gray wizard till the end of the earth, man.
a small, closely knit group, a company, venturing off into the unknown with the same burdens. Oh, oh, sign me
Yeah.
up.
At the
But we
same time,
mentioned
I don't think we've talked about anything that really makes this book what it is. You know what I mean? Because you could just take any paragraph from this book and be like, oh my goodness, this is just beautiful. It's art. Like, you can't experience it until you've read it.
Well,
Yeah,
like I mentioned before, it's a classic example of the hero's journey, and it's one of the very first books to actually tell it. Very few books, I should say. Um, and it follows that cycle all the way to the very end. And I guess the way it lasts for a long time is because of that reason, because people are seeking some sort of adventure to go on when there's nothing else to do, or the fact that a lot of people have a lot of things and yet they're still bored or unsatisfied, or that they're dying and they don't know what else to do with their lives. So The Hobbit is an example of just wanting to get out and experience the world itself, do something for yourself. um, I mean, I can't tell you the number of times I've woken up in the middle of the night thinking, what am I still doing here, of all places? I got stories to write. I got to share them with other people. And it's a constant struggle every day to write them all out and share them. And of course there's other aspects to it, like marketing and publishing and all that. But just getting into that mindset, just imagining what your life will be like if you decide to take up this mission, this quest, build your skill tree, and breaking out these kinds of skills and talents. Just imagine how fulfilling that would be. And the more you let that sink into yourself, the better you become, and it becomes your default setting too. You don't have to second guess. You don't have to, think back and think, okay, is this what I'm doing okay? I mean, do I have to get permission from other people to let me do this? It's all onto you. So The Hobbit pretty much presents that kind of detail. That's how it lasts for a long time. That's how it resonates with a lot of people, especially us.
Hmm.
Yeah, and we're talking about Bilbo, choosing to go on this adventure. But as I was reading through the first chapter, it kind of felt like he didn't want to go. It wasn't until Gandalf came back to his house the following day after the dinner with the dwarves and essentially kind of booted him out the door and said, "Come on, you got to get going." Because Bilbo seemed almost content to just stay and have his second breakfast and just kind of forget about the previous night.
Yeah, it was like a kind of internal struggle that he was having. Like, I want to go, but at the same time, what's going to happen to the Shire if I leave? What about tea time? I have people coming over. Like, it's not like he doesn't have anything to do. He's got a pretty full schedule. He's a hobbit after all. There's like 9 meal times in their day. They're pretty organized and scheduled in that way, but when the sense of, like, the opportunity for chaos and adventure come, he's like, can I actually go through with this? And it wasn't until Gandalf comes back that says, no, the opportunity is still here. Take it now or don't. That's when he's says, like, yeah, okay, I do have to go. And like
and it,
the opportunity for the hero's journey is presented as, Gandalf showing up, but not everybody's hero's journey is going to have so obvious of a start.
yeah, and probably nobody's in this day and age. I don't know how many Gandalfs there are out there forcing, the will of the cosmos upon you. This character Gandalf is literally a god. Like, He is showing up and saying this is going to happen, and he's going away and letting them do their thing only so much as he can guarantee their safety. And he revisits, and what is it, Deus Ex Machina? Is that the thing that is when God intervenes and saves your life?
God in the machine, or Deus Ex Machina.
So, and I think you gotta decide what is going to be your Gandalf in this life. What is it? Like, at some point you have to accept that there isn't going to be an omnipotent force showing up at your doorstep to tell you to make the decision that is hard and easily avoided, and that it is going to be worth it to take the road less followed. You have to decide what your belief system is that's going to enable you to say, look, Gandalf's at my doorstep and I have to make this choice.
Yeah, and he's a mage archetype, and mages come on all different shapes and sizes too, in other stories too.
Well, Will, I'm glad you made the comparison with God or a god to Gandalf, because the very first chapter of this, I was getting a vibe. We could call it an allegorical part of the book, where the Shire is kind of representing the Garden of Eden, and it's Bilbo's decision to become a thief and a burglar is kind of his moment of eating the fruit of knowledge of good and evil. He has to become this, and he knows he's gonna.
Dude, and Smaug is the Canaanites.
I actually thought of Smaug as the serpent in the garden when I was reading it, just because of all of the different ways he tried to, like, deceive Bilbo. Like,
but there's 15 books in the Old Testament talking about deception.
Yeah.
But ultimately,
Smaug's the Canaanites.
Gandalf comes back to the Shire and kind of gives Bilbo the boot out of his house in the similar way that God kicked Adam out of the Garden of Eden.
And they went and they reclaimed the land of milk and honey.
What if the promised land that Bilbo received was the Shire after his whole adventure, after his trip to the underworld? When you realize you're in the Garden of Eden all along, that's when you return home you have a brand new appreciation of it. Because if he just lived his whole life in the Shire just hating his neighbors, he wouldn't have lived... He would have just lived the rest of his life hating his neighbors. He wouldn't have had that, Gandalf coming by for tea a couple years later with Balin just to hang out. Wouldn't have all those memories.
I almost think the promised land in this metaphor is the courage that he finds.
You don't think that's like divine grace?
Through who? Bilbo or through Gandalf?
I think he sacrifices a large part of his comfort to go through a process of temperament and comes out of it with the bounties of, whatever you want to call that omnipotent force, but literally it's Gandalf, right? And Gandalf has changed him and given him strength. But I don't know, man. He's like, if anything, I'd call him like one of the angels that shows up on the path for the people. Bilbo is like an angel of God.
Huh.
Right? And the dwarves are the promised people. The promised land is the mountain. And the desert is the other mountains and the elves.
The dwarves seek to reclaim their home again, essentially.
Kind of like the 12 tribes of Israel.
Holy crap, there's 12 of them. Oh!
Oh, jeez.
But
did he even try?
What are we getting ourselves into here?
he just plagiarized the Bible and put a fantasy theme on it. Well, this is fan fiction of the Bible.
Well, so is J.K. Rowling.
Yeah.
So I wasn't reading this through the lens of the Bible. I think it's just that we are also reading it. And so that idea of the Garden of Eden and these things that we just talked about were kind of fresh in my mind. But I tried to stick with reading this through a lens of pure mythology and and fantasy, and just enjoyed getting lost in the adventure with the characters.
It makes you think that the people that read the Old Testament and then make articles online talking about how it's about Jesus, like, I get how they get that. When I read The Hobbit and tell you guys it's about the Old Testament,
Yeah.
it's like, you're looking for things that confirm your beliefs. This is confirmation bias.
Yeah,
Anybody could tell you that everything is actually about Jesus.
you could actually make an even better comparison by saying, like, we're reading The Hobbit and saying it's about the Lord of the Rings trilogy, because it's not. Because there's a few differences that I've noticed, like when Gollum is talking to himself, he calls himself precious, not the ring. That was weird. That was just a little change that I was not expecting at all. And there's no Smeagol.
Yeah.
Well, I noticed that too, and I think it's one of the main things that differentiates the hero from the villain. The hero here, Bilbo, he's not thinking about himself. He's not trying to hoard the treasure. He's sharing it with the community. Whereas the villain in a story typically is doing unwholesome acts to benefit their own, to benefit themselves, if that makes sense. And so with Gollum, he killed his brother for that ring, and he wanted it all for himself. I think that's one of the aspects that makes him villainous. But I think this is one of the few stories that it's quicker to read the book than to attempt to watch the movies.
Yeah.
Because, it's like 3 movies on this.
Like, what were you thinking, sir? Like, what were you just gonna reincarnate people and redefine things, and you're just gonna throw stuff in and then take away really good stuff? And
Someone on
what are you, God?
YouTube cut all 3 films into a 20-minute video that should have been like, this is the official video that you only need to watch. You don't need to bother watching the 3 movies. You could just watch this instead. So somebody cut everything from every important scene from all 3 movies and packed it.
Wasn't in the book. Wasn't.
Well,
that's
Yeah.
right.
That's
Speaking
another
of-
thing. That's another thing that we can see in real time how the Old Testament got edited, because we know The Hobbit was written first. Then The Lord of the Rings came by, and then they made the movies out of The Lord of the Rings. Then they revisited The Hobbit and decided, hey, all those Lord of the Rings characters, we could just, shoehorn them in there. We just sneak them in. Just a little bit of Jesus smuggling here and there.
Yeah,
We can make it
yeah.
look like we knew what was happening from the very start. So Legolas isn't in this book, but when you watch the
Gadriel.
movies, yeah, like the barrels running down the river scene was completely different. Like, Legolas wasn't shooting at them with arrows. They were just rolling down hoping they all survived, which is like kind of scarier if you really think about it, because like you get the whole thing from Bilbo's point of view. Like, I have no way of knowing if my 12 buddies here are still alive. So like, and that goes on for a while. It's not just, oh, Legolas is fighting us, we have a little battle, and then we all crash on the shore and then continue our adventure. There's a little bit of chaos in that moment where Bilbo just doesn't know if he has succeeded or not. Like, yeah.
Yeah,
So-
I don't know. Like, he changed a lot, but I do appreciate the trilogy nonetheless.
So to go to that one scene where Bilbo meets Smaug for the first time, and that he is more of a serpent, and that Bilbo comes up with these witty names and everything. It's sort of like him inviting himself to take a piece of Smaug for himself and then kind of mirroring it onto Smaug, as if he's a serpent himself while looking for the Arkenstone, like a piece of disguise too.
It was some pretty good improv. Like, he just walks into this room. He has no idea what he's looking for, no idea what he's gonna do when he gets there, but he's got to do something.
Yeah, I have his little riddle speech written down when he confronts Smaug, because that's the only way to talk to a dragon is in riddles if you don't want to tell him the direct truth. He says, "I'm the clue finder, the web cutter, the stinging fly. I was chosen for the lucky number." So like, just a couple of the little riddles that if you've been reading up until this point, you realize what each and every one of those names mean, and it's kind of it's another allegorical example of these names that ancient Norse heroes kind of get their same names from, because that, like we said, the Norse mythology is a big part of his inspiration here, and like all of these old ancient heroes in this age that he's portraying for us, like that's just the way their language works. It's like they get their names from their deeds. Like he is the one chosen for the lucky number.
It's almost the same experience as applying for a job and going in for an interview, right? Like you're nobody and your life is boring and you need to make this look interesting and you need to fabricate and you need to posture against the dragon of society, and it gives you authority through falsity.
Yeah,
Yeah,
like
that's
I just didn't work a couple years at auto parts factory. I need to make up a special title for myself. Like
Yeah,
I am Scott
exactly.
Bender of Rods.
I have a vested interest in the betterment of people. Myself, specifically, but I won't admit that.
Yeah. The one thing that everybody lives out but will never admit.
And at the time of the writing, like how much of, feudal society and the class divisions still existed, how much of that interaction would be paralleled in the times that we're reading it at the original publishing. Like,
Hmm.
I was watching How I Met Your Mother the other day, and I was like, you know why this is so profound? Because my life is not very profound, and neither is theirs, and we don't have any rules, and it's so easy to relate to these people. You watch an old movie, and you're like, this is something completely abstract,
Yeah,
and
really. Like they're playing by a different set of rules than we are right now. And you go back even further, the rules change drastically.
yeah, and it's like, I think it was Across the Universe. Jude was at like Harvard and this professor calls him out for not walking on the sidewalk. And it's like, yeah, that's the distinction, the rules. Whereas in How I Met Your Mother, guy's sitting on the ground talking to a woman in the rain. And it's like you could go back 80 years. It's like you can't get your pants dirty. Why aren't you on the path? What are you doing sitting not on a chair?
When was
And
the
it's
last
just
time
like,
you saw a keep off the grass sign? People don't care about
yeah,
their lawns anymore. Like, we're different rules for
no.
different people.
So there's something to be said about that smog conversation. I think there's some parallels.
There were
I
a
thought it
couple.
was okay.
There were a
No, go
couple
ahead.
moments where the characters found themselves in a situation that you would think they have absolutely no hope. If you found yourself in the same situation, like in Mirkwood when they encounter the spiders. And I think the author did a really good job at giving the impression that even in dire situations where there is no hope, there's always a little glimmering of something that you can do, a little glimmering of hope there. And we see it again with Smog. He has that one scale on his chest that's bare, and that's just enough to get an arrow through. So there's always a little bit of hope. And I thought that was one of the messages that the author was trying to convey and that I picked up on. What do you guys think?
Yeah, and like that little glimmer of hope geek goes even further because no one else hears them talking about that little missing scale except for that bird. And the bird flies away. Like, that guy wasn't in the movie.
Yeah, it's a whole completely different story in the
Yeah.
movie.
It's a completely different meaning to it too, because in the movie they come across Bard in their journey, don't they? And they like become friends, and then like
Yeah, he
and it,
smuggles them into the town, and the town doesn't like them, and it's like the exact opposite of what it is in the book.
yeah, and it gets revealed that the defenses of the city, like the defenses of the city get revealed in completely different ways. And when the dragon finally like becomes a threat, it was this little bird that comes by that only certain people of a certain lineage can hear. So it's like one in a million, in a million, in a million chance of it happening. And through just pure chance, it does. This bird tells Bard where to shoot. There is a weak point. Don't just fire willy nilly. You have something to aim at now, like Jordan Peterson would say. Once you have something to aim at, possibilities become endless. That's when you can actually reach your point. You have to have that little bit of focus. And it just comes from a bird who overheard a conversation.
Don't abandon all hope, even if you're underground with hobgoblins or being chased by wargs.
Yeah. Or if
Just wait
there's
and see.
or if there's a Death Star blowing up planets in the galaxy, there's always a glimmer of hope.
There was one thing, kind of jumping back to the beginning of this, and it was a very minor aspect. They were talking about how the kings of men were out fighting on the borders. And so were these the Rangers that they talked about in Lord of the Rings?
I don't think so.
I think they were supposed to be like protecting the boundaries of the Shire. And I just thought that, even though the author's giving us this this painting of a land of the Shire where everything's, nice and perfect, he's also kind of hinting that there are dark things afoot outside the borders.
Yeah, they're like separated from the chaos. They've isolated themselves in their own little bubble. So like that little node in that network isn't connected to the rest of them. They built their little cage and they're protected by these humans. I guess it could be the Rangers. I'm not really sure. But there's lots of things in this book that turn into different things once we get to the Lord of the Rings. Like I really don't get the vibe that the Ring of Power in this book was meant to be, Sauron's one ring at this point in time. Like when we talk
and I think that's
Sorry,
a
go
really
ahead.
good technique. He's layered in elements of obscureness that it is just enough to give you a story, but not enough to lock it in concrete.
Yeah.
And that's skill to be able to write something as successful and individual as The Hobbit, and then to be able to build on it and just take stuff and not destroy what you built and create an entire trilogy out of it. Like I don't think it's laziness, but it could have.
I was like, this kind of method is what like the entire Marvel universe, for example, is built on. Like they started in the 60s with the Fantastic Four, but then by the time Spider-Man and the Avengers and the X-Men are all doing their thing, that's all in the same world and it all works together sometimes. Like there's always going to be continuity errors. Like you could see the same thing in the Bible where there's slight continuity errors. But like you could see the same kind of thing where once something happens in the Lord of the Rings or in the New Testament, now something in the Hobbit or the Old Testament means something completely different. Like now this isn't just a ring that turns you invisible. This is Sauron's one ring that has to be undertaken by Frodo and the Fellowship and everything going on.
I know
Controls
you
the
meant
elves.
the 40s. When you said the 60s, I know you meant the 40s.
Okay, yeah.
And so does our audience.
Yeah,
It's like, if they came out in the 60s, how did Captain America inspire the Americans in the Second World War?
No. Captain America came out in the 30s, and it was written by a different comic company. It was created by Jack Kirby and another writer. I forget the name of. People that actually care about this stuff are gonna, get really mad at me. But once Jack Kirby got hired by Marvel, then Stan Lee had the great idea to make the Avengers and say, hey, shouldn't Captain America be an Avenger? So they wrote this storyline where, like the old Captain America comics, which is completely unrecognizable from some of the newer stuff, like they froze him in a block of ice and then resurrected him so he could become an Avengers and then thereby lead them. But it's pretty weird. Like I said, when you're reading the old Captain America comics from the 30s, they mean something completely different once you've read Avengers number 17 to 30, whatever.
Mhm.
So like everything that comes out as a sequel effectively does change the original source material because it's just the way we think about it.
Yeah, and we get to a place where we don't even identify with the originals. Like, you look at that Enola Holmes show that just came out on Netflix where they're like, yeah, sorry, but Sherlock likes women now.
Yeah.
And it's like, that's fair. Like, everything is a production of the times, right? It's all being influenced constantly, and that's why you can have the hero's journey with, the hat of a samurai, or the hat of a magician, or the hat of a little furry-footed Bilbo Baggins.
Or a big macho man in tights with the underwear on the outside.
Or, Luke Skywalker.
Exactly.
I was curious if there was a favorite character you guys had or someone you identified with in this story, or just a favorite part of the story.
Bilbo's my boy. He's a real nice guy. He likes his tea and his smoke rings, and he doesn't afraid of anything too much enough to help dwarves. But as far as favorite part,
I too identified with Bilbo, and I guess one of my favorite parts was where he's riddling with Gollum under the goblin caves in the Misty Mountains.
I think I would have to say him mocking the spiders and the naming of Sting. I think it was cool when they found the swords and the swords had names, and I thought, oh, cool concept. But the whole notion of him getting this elven dagger or dirk and earning it a name on his journey that transcends the bounds of Bilbo and leads over to Frodo, like that's so cool. And using that ring of invisibility and throwing rocks and defeating massive spiders.
Yeah, do you remember?
That's a good one too. And
Batman would be proud.
And then I guess the one where he is confronting Smaug, where he comes up with those riddles and everything just off the top of his head and everything, and finding the Arkenstone. That was a profound moment.
I'm gonna go with the moment where first of all, Gandalf's my favorite character because I just love everything about him. I don't necessarily relate to him as much because that might be getting a bit of a god complex, like we've said. But my favorite part was when they all come up to Bjorn's house and they all come in two at a time. It's just like they're all just kind of shooting the breeze, talking about their adventures. And every 5 minutes, two of the dwarves come in and say, hey, here I am, Dwallin and Ballin, at your service. It's just like Gandalf knew exactly what would happen if all 12 of them, or all 14 of them, showed up on the doorstep. He'd say, like, I'm not too fond of dwarves. Get out of my house. So he says, just a small party, just him and a hobbit and one of the dwarves. It was Thorin. And, they just start talking about their adventure. It's kind of like the boiled frogs effect. Like if you put a frog in water and you start to boil the water, it'll survive. But if you throw a frog in boiling water, it won't. So you just got to ease him into it a little bit, and he'll warm up to the dwarves eventually after he starts hearing this really cool story. And it just made me think, like, if there was no other magic in this story, this shows how Gandalf is a real wizard.
Yeah, I actually remember telling my wife about that because it was so cunning, where he was telling him a story about his former home, or so he had suspected, and he made a gamble that this man would be interested in hearing about, even if it was a lie, he would be interested in hearing about the sights of his old homeland, and that the interruptions of the dwarves would be so inconsequential in comparison to the bounty of being able to bask in a tale of his childhood, of his family, of his old stomping ground, that he would just let the dwarves come in before he even knew what he was signing himself up for, because he wanted to hear the story. And it's like, that is mastermind level genius.
Like, that is the kind of things that make me think, like, yeah, magic is real, and that's how you do it. Like, I'm a big fan of a guy named Alan Moore. He's another comic book writer, and he talks a lot about his method of writing comics and presenting the images on the page, and like actually hypnotizing people to say, okay, I need to look at this image, then read this, and just keeps you into it no matter what. Like, authors of any medium talk about the same kind of things, and even just visual artists, they say they want to draw your eye across the page in a certain way. And like, that's the kind of things I think of when I think of magic, because like, you can manipulate someone's perception of something so effectively that the majority of people that read this page, just full of pictures, inconsequential pictures that have no real order to it if you just look at it as a flat piece of art, he manipulates your eye into like reading the story the way he wants you to. And like, he does the same thing with his characters in his stories that manipulate people in the same kind of way. And it just really makes me think of that kind of stuff when I read a story like this. Like, yeah, Gandalf's a wizard, all right.
It makes me think of Fight Club too, you know, that experiment in storytelling. But the other thing I do want to mention before we stray too far from Bjorn's cabin is that this guy is a model of what appears to me closely resembles a native style of living, an Aboriginal First Nations sort of character, and also a bit of a conservative and a sustainable off-grid living lifestyle. The guy's got it all. He literally lives in a land of milk and honey of his own creation, and is wary of visitors and confirms their story afterwards. And that is the reason that he trusts them and helps them out more beyond the one night.
Yeah, he likes them right away, but that doesn't mean he needs to trust them at all. Like, he's been around deception before. He's going to cover all his tracks, make sure their story's true.
Says it point blank. Like, I don't know if you're lying or not, but your story earns you dinner and a warm bed. And those beds are in a longhouse. The description in the book is of a native longhouse. It is like this, and it's got beams on the outside of the building, and between the beams and the outside of the walls, it's got the beds, and they're off the ground. You go right over to the Huron village. That's exactly what the longhouses look like, and it's wonderful, and it's massive, and it's got wings and a courtyard, and he's literally making cream and honey, and it's fantastic. If we could all live like that, I'm sure we would be quite fat and content.
Yeah, just living his little vegetarian lifestyle. Doesn't eat any of the animals. They're all his friends. And just has his little bees making honey all day.
A fireplace at the center.
Since Tolkien borrowed from Norse mythology, I'm not sure or if you guys saw the similarities between Bjorn and Beowulf.
Yeah, another historical conversation we could have that I won't make any arguments about is the influence of Norse culture on the Native Americans of North America. But we're not going to go there. We're not going to talk about whether or not, they're all related.
Yeah, like some of those longhouses, you could easily make a argument that he's describing the old Norse buildings of the same kind of like shape
Yeah,
and size and
and
design.
we're not going to
but-
talk about all the words in the Ojibwe language that are the same in Norse language, and we're not going to talk about the words in the native languages that are the same in Sanskrit languages, and we're not going to talk about the cities that definitely are upside down boats and named after Norse people and are native settlements. We're not going to talk about that because we don't know enough about it.
Yeah, no one does. We've already mentioned Eric the Red and Leif Erikson, but that's only a fraction of the story.
Well, do you want to talk about Smaug?
Smaug.
Like, what did he represent in your eyes?
The corruption of power. Or at least that's what I thought the dragon sickness represented. Smaug was just the rightful king under the mountain, and they killed him. They came and murdered him and stole his treasure.
He was the hero of the story.
Smaug?
Yeah.
Okay, let's get into this.
Wait.
I'm down.
Could you clarify something? I thought Smaug had came and stolen the treasure from the elves, but you're saying he's the rightful king under the mountain.
Well, I mean, the
when
dwarves
enough-
kicked out the goblins, right?
Yeah, when enough time passes, you gotta think that Smaug was victorious, right? Like, he conquered them, and he took the treasure for himself. Isn't that how maps are drawn these days? So was the treasure really, Thorin's rightful heir, or was he just conquering those who conquered his fathers?
Well, Smaug is the representation of the corrupt king, I would say.
Yeah, he's certainly
He's
not
kinda-
benevolent.
Like a miser,
You could
hoarding all his wealth.
You could almost say the same thing about Thorin. I mean, he wasn't a very generous dude. He got, especially after Smaug died, you could see that he became less and less generous with his wealth. Like, he wanted it all for himself. He wouldn't give up 1/12. He wouldn't give up 1/14 for the Arkenstone. He just wanted to win the battle and then take it all for himself.
I think what you're describing is a Republican. The man was not willing to sacrifice his own wealth to get his own wealth. It took one arrow to kill the dragon. He could have done that. He just didn't.
Yeah, but from this new perspective, it wasn't his treasure. Well, yeah, I guess it was. He did, come into the mountain and reclaim it all after Smaug had died, but he didn't really earn it other than his journey there and sat on his stone.
But he was there making the gold 150 years back.
Yeah.
They carved the halls and they refined the gold and they made the stuff. And in his mind, he was just going to finish a fight. The fight wasn't over and he wasn't done writing his story. And he would be damned to give away anything that was rightfully his to a group of people that, in the elves' case, they literally trapped him. They're like, hey, what are you doing in our woods? He's like, mind your business. I'm in your woods. I'm walking on a path. Get out of here.
So the battle's not over. That's what you said. From Thorn's perspective, the war wasn't over.
Yeah, he had a non-negotiable agreement.
Wouldn't you say the same thing about the Germans after World War I? In their perspective, the war wasn't over. They were crippled by, all of the agreements afterwards, and they decided to take back their rightful freedoms among the Europeans.
Right, but the big difference here is they were broke, whereas Thorin has all this wealth now. He's recaptured the mountain.
Yeah, no, I think what happened there was, a lot of variables, and then you had a charismatic leader who gave them an enemy, and he was wrong.
Yeah, we're talking about a fiction. We're talking about a fiction here, but that doesn't mean we can't speculate all of the other variables taking place in this story of The Hobbit. Because there's many of ways from Smaug's perspective, Thorin is the bad guy. Dwarves can't be trusted. The humans shoot at him with their bows of yew.
Okay, so here's what Smaug is. Smaug is an egotistically driven, selfish power force. He doesn't deserve the gold, He didn't work for the gold. He didn't acquire the gold. He does not have any means to amass the gold or the kingdoms. And he came in narcissistically demanding it.
Just an
And
unhinged
was
will to
tyrannous.
power.
Yeah, exactly. He's Napoleon. He's Columbus. He's Raskolnikov.
Yeah. Rodya Raskolnikov.
But that's what he is. He's ego. He is unmitigated and incorrect and undeserving and unrelentless ego.
And then when the dragon dies and gives way to the dragon sickness, corrupting everybody with the power of greed and power and everything. It's like it also talks about like the master of the lake town, the one that isn't Bard. He goes mad with the dragon sickness, and then he has to run away and tries to escape with some treasure and money, and then he just ends up dying.
I don't think it was dragon sickness, and he didn't die in the book. Oh wait, he did, didn't he? Starved to death after a few days.
Yeah.
Did he?
I don't.
Anyways,
I'm sure it said that he died. The master of the town.
well, it's kind of like, have you guys watched that Rick and Morty show?
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
So have you guys seen the episode of The Purge?
Oh
Rick
yeah.
and Morty
yeah,
episode?
yeah.
So
Part of
so
it.
they go in, they destroy all the leaders of the Purge, and then it's just the proletariats hanging out, and they're like, "I'm hungry," and they're like, "I can make bread." And they're like, "Well, I'm not gonna make bread for free." And then they just plan out the next Purge because they're all pissed off and they don't know what to do. And it's like, that's what happened to Thorin. Like that, you had greed sitting atop this mountain for so long. Like, why can't I just do that now? Like, why can't, like, it worked for him for 150 years. Like, I'm going to be the powerful guy now. I defeated the bad guy. I'm the king of the castle. Neener, neener, neener. You can't get up here. And then you start kicking 6-year-olds, and it's just a bad time.
And this is what starts the Battle of Five Armies, correct?
6 if you count the Eagles. 7 if you count Bjorn.
I mean, yeah, I guess it is what started the Battle of the Five Armies, but not really, because it was just like random distraction where it was like, oh, real enemies showed up. Let's stop being idiots.
Yeah, and that just goes back to like, if aliens invaded, we'd all unite pretty quickly, right? But I'm looking for, the method in which we don't need an invader to unite. Like,
Well, and it's
how do you
like,
get on that page?
you got to realize that, 9 times out of 10, you got a lot of humans on this planet that are consumed with getting their comfort, satisfying their ego, being able to have second breakfast. And if they got past that and remembered that, like, there's other things greater than what they are focused on and fixated on, they wouldn't even think about, oh, I need to get drunk tonight. I need to have another smoke right now because I'm just so stressed out. It's like, there are people starving in Africa, and we could all band together and help them. They might not be starving in Africa anymore. That was the line 30 years ago. But it's like, what are you going to do after you're completely happy? What are you going to do after all your needs are met? Are you going to feel fulfilled? Or are you going to go save the dwarves' homeland?
Yeah.
And that kind of brings us full circle to what we were talking about with the beginning of the book, how maybe Bilbo would not have ever done this if he wasn't forced to think about the community.
Bilbo had nothing to gain from this journey except for the adventure itself.
And a 14th share of the profits.
Yeah, but he didn't really end up
Came
with
home.
that much. Can't carry
And
that
came
much home on his one little pony.
And he came back to write his story, write his book.
Speaking
wisdom.
of profits, did you guys notice that Gandalf really wasn't interested in the gold at all?
Yeah.
Of course not.
Well, he took some. Didn't he
He
take
took
some
a
of
little.
He took the treasure that they found from the trolls afterwards on the trip home. So like,
But I don't
though?
think he wasn't part of the 1/14th share, if I recall.
No, the treasure from the goblins or the trolls that they buried beside the river and enchanted.
yeah. He didn't take any of the
After
gold
the
from
mutton
Smaug.
chapter.
Yeah, it was in like the very end where in their return trip, like you said, they got the enchanted gold from the trolls, and Gandalf was the one that took that. He's just like, you keep all your treasure, Bilbo. I'm good with this.
I thought he gave him half and threw it on his pony.
He might have.
But like the man just like he acquired a sword. He was like, "This is a good sword. I'm gonna use this to fight orc armies for the next 2,000 years."
Yeah.
Because he's a simple guy, you know. He lives a life of minimalism.
Yeah. He's a guy that knows what he wants. He's got a set of goals, and he doesn't need a treasure chest full of gems and gold to fulfill those journeys. Like,
But
he wasn't even worried about the dwarves for most of this book. He was all about that necromancer in the Far East, or
but
wherever.
like he's also like this huge like big picture cosmos war strategist who's like, if the dwarves get the mountain and the goblins don't get the mountain, then the goblins don't get the mountain and the dwarves get the mountain, and that's good.
It's all chess. He can reason with dwarves. He can't reason with orcs. So
Yeah.
like, he knew this battle was about to happen. He knew that if Smaug was ever killed or driven out from the mountain, that the orcs would notice and, bring most of their forces down to fight them. So like,
Yeah.
he orchestrated this whole battle, and Gandalf was the one that decided that sacrifice. Like, elves, dwarves, men, they're all gonna die, but this battle has to take place.
And that's the big problem with societies at large today, when you get people in a position who think there's always a war going on, and they're constantly positioning culture pieces and religion pieces and tourism pieces, and they have this map of the world with tiny little flags, and they're thinking of the long game. But luckily, those shadow figures don't really exist in reality.
Yeah, I guess. Depends on your perspective.
Right? Like, everybody's got a good intention. Maybe just in case we should all, go into positions of power and work for the betterment of humanity. Secretly. Don't tell the cabal, but, get elected and make people better and make people happier.
Yeah.
I like that.
Anyways, till next time, may the force be with you.
Or equal the mass times acceleration.
Farewell, farewell. And long live the fruit bearer. Where can people find out about this book club?
Bookwave.club, YouTube, Anchor, Stitcher, Deezer, Spotify, Apple, Google, Anchor. Some bathroom stalls across North America.
Yeah, that's about it.
Right. Better pull the plug.
Yeah. YouTube, if you didn't mention that, if you want to take a look at our pretty faces, decide which
This will
one.
all get fixed in post.
Yeah, let us know what you think about The Hobbit. What did you think about it? And was there other things that we missed out? Or what did you think about it? Let us know in the comments below.
Yeah, and we'll see you next time for Lord of the Rings Part 1, The Fellowship of the Ring.